Hello, and it's just fantastic to see so many people joining us for today's presentation. So a big welcome to members and guests from Committee for Perth for today's New Horizon webinar, the implications of the AI for Perth organisations. We're delighted to host property and business leader Ben Lyle to speak to us. For those, we had 240 people registered for today's event. It's actually the biggest webinar we've ever done. A true testimony to the topic AI and also to our presenter today, Ben Lyle. Somebody is just encouraging people to, again, please put yourself on mute. In beginning, I would like to say Kaya Wanju and acknowledge that we are on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay respects to elders past and present. In Perth today, we have a beautiful winter's day and we're in the middle of the Makaroo season, which is the coldest and wettest time of the year, which again, the rain last night actually is testimony to that. As Kelly said, I'm Paula Rogers and I'm the CEO of Committee for Perth. And we're a member-based organisation that champions for a greater Perth each and every day. I'd really like to welcome board members Maya van den Driesen and Pauline Gazard and thank them for joining us today. And again, thank all of you for giving up your precious time to join with us today. In terms of the format, this webinar aligns with the Committee for Perth's commitment to fostering informed discussions on critical issues shaping Perth. The numbers, as I said, wanting to hear this presentation today say it all. It's the largest webinar we've ever done. I actually met Ben at an Outrage Fringe festival earlier this year, and I'd seen the article that he was interviewed for in the West. And I said, would you talk to members of the Committee for Perth? And he said, yeah, I'd be really interested to. So here we are today. Ben has emphasized that AI capabilities are accelerating rapidly, and there are significant implications for societies and the business community. He's spoken of AI developments as putting the world on the cusp of one of the most significant events in human history. Together, this webinar will provide insights into the transformative trends affecting all of us. Ben will present for 30 minutes, and then following the presentation, I've lots of questions, but I'm sure you do too. So I will reach out to you, and we've got, in terms of asking the questions, please submit your questions via the Q&A tab in the top toolbar. Again, we don't have a huge amount of time, and we will try and synthesize the questions that are most relevant. And Ben may provide some answers beyond today's presentation if he has some time. But he's recently just come back from some travel, so we're very, very lucky that he's here with us today. So please join with me in welcoming Ben Lyle, the Managing Director of Hesperia Property Group, with us today. He's an extensive experience in all facets of property development and investment planning and approvals, sales and leasing, finance, construction, and asset management. Before property, he was director and co-founder of investment bank Azure Capital and a director of Poynton & Partners. He studied mechanical engineering at UWA and more recently he completed the program for management development at Harvard and a postgraduate diploma in applied finance and investment. He's a variety of philanthropic interests and board roles. Ben, thank you for agreeing to speak with Committee for Perth members and guests today on a topic that is both exciting and terrifying. Over to you, Ben.
Thanks very much, Paula. And firstly, thank you for the opportunity to come and chat to everyone today. And thank you to you and the Committee for Perth. Thank you also to a few members of my team, Mortaza, who's sort of heading up AI efforts at Hesperia and helped me with some of the original work that I was doing around the memo for my team. Annie and Tara, who helped pull together the presentation. As you'd noted, I just got back in from the US, so they've done some heavy lifting for me. So just before we jump into the presentation, I thought quickly, by way of context, why am I talking? I thought I'd set out why I'm talking to everybody about AI, and then what we're going to run through today. So I guess the the reason we're talking about AI is, as Paula mentioned, I'd written a memo which had caught the interest of various parties, and there's some press on it. Why did I write the memo? Well, I've had a long-held interest in AI. For me, it goes a little bit to the essence of what is thought, what is intelligence, and what are we. And so I'd been following to some degree, but I was lucky enough to attend an investor conference at the end of 2024 in New York, where they had the head of BlackRock, the CIO of Meta, and a range of other big players, Citadel, others, people running trillions of dollars, talking about the significance of AI and how committed these funds were to backing the technology, and also their views around how quickly things were going to move. And so I guess over the Christmas break, I spent a fair bit of time deep diving and really just trying to understand where we were in the AI journey, where it was headed and what that would mean for society, business and investment, really. I wrote a fairly extensive memo for the team with a lot of source documents. The team, of course, assumed that I'd had AI write it for me, and then asked AI to summarize it for them. I don't know how many of them actually read it, but the intent was really to start a conversation and get people thinking about AI and what it means. I think we often, in times of high uncertainty, tend to focus on easier things and bury our heads a little bit. And we're talking about the next interest rate movement, whilst these sort of seismic shifts are coming. And as I'd like to stress, I'm not a tech specialist or an AI specialist. The space is extremely quickly, moving extremely quickly. I was lucky enough to, as I said, spend a fair bit of time over the break, pondering on it and researching and learning. But even since I wrote it, things continue to move at pace. And I think that's one of the things everyone has to get comfortable with, is it's hard to know exactly where it's going to go and what it means. But I think there are some things when things are uncertain. For me, I'm always looking at what are the bedrocks or the foundations of things that you can rely on where possible, and how do you try to maximize your exposure to the positive outcomes and minimize your exposure to negative outcomes. And that's a little bit what we'll kind of run through today. So you happy for me to jump into the presentation?
Please do. Looking forward to it. Over to you.
So have we got the presentation now?
Just put it as whole screen.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yep. Great. All right. Perfect. Thank you. So today, really, the hope was we'll run through just very quickly, what is AI? Where have we been, if you like, in terms of the journey, because it's been going for a while. What's the current state of AI? What's looking likely in terms of future developments? Where's the focus? How might things evolve? And then what are the implications, at the most macro level for the world and society, down to, and then what it means to WA and the businesses here, and obviously society here, and then make some time for Q&A. So in terms of what is AI, the concept's actually been around for a very long time. There's been ideas of intelligent machines, dating back, into the sort of, I think, BC type period. But modern AI really, which is considered to be computer science around, creating machines that mimic human behavior, really had its ground roots laid in the 50s and 60s to very significant people. Alan Turing, people have heard of the Turing test, but it was essentially devising a test to assess whether a machine could effectively replicate a human in a way which was indistinguishable. And John McCarthy, who was actually a gentleman who coined the term, and I've forgotten the name of the conference, but there was a significant conference that was arranged where a great number of parties with an interest in the field, mathematicians and computer science and the like, gathered, and they really set out the foundations and the direction that they wanted to take in exploring the concept of AI. It obviously it's a very complex thing to try and replicate what the human brain's doing, and so there was an initial flurry of interest and activity, but ultimately it was hard to deliver results. And 70s and 80s were sort of deemed the winters for AI, where I guess the results and progress disappointed. Then really, and again, this is where AI and the advances in AI are a confluence of a number of factors, particularly advances in computational power, as well as the way people model and think about the algorithms to replicate the way a brain might work. So Geoffrey Hinton, a lot of people would have heard him. He was the guy on 60 Minutes who is considered the sort of modern father of AI, if you like, in the more recent times, and really introduced the concept of deep learning and neural networks, which I'll talk about in a second. He spoke about the fact that AI progress was starting to alarm him, and I think he quoted that he thought there was a 10 to 20% sort of existential threat from AI. I've always found it hard to understand how people can really evaluate that. But really, the confluence of both improvements in computing technology, but also then, I guess, the methodologies by which people were looking to, as I said, replicate logic and thought, saw much more substantial process. And I think again, it's fair to say that really where AI came into the spotlight was in 2022 with the launch of ChatGPT. That was really around having a natural language interface, but AI had been running in the background for a long time, and particularly people like Google and the others had been doing some pretty amazing things with it before that. But LLMs, and again, I'll speak to that, brought it into the spotlight, and you saw a subsequent surge in investment. So as I said, at the most macro level, AI is, the theory and methods to build machines that mimic human behavior. Within that, machine learning is a subset, which was really statistical methods to infer probable outcomes for particular problems. Deep learning is, again, a more sophisticated subset of that, which was really where the idea of creating neural networks was created. Neural networks, really the idea behind that was that you created something that replicated, if you like, the neurons in a human brain, where individual nodes would undertake particular computations. They would all be cross-linked. It's the cross-linking of the human brain, the trillion, I can't remember the number, but the almost infinite connectivity across the human brain that creates the potential for great complexity. And really neural networks were there to look to replicate that, and then they would be tuned, and the connections would be given different weightings to produce the desired results. Generative AI then is again a subset of that, which is really about being able to take an input and a trained model and create new outputs. And then within that, LLMs, which were really large language models, and ChatGPT was an example of that. These were natural language models, and they were models that were trained on increasingly large sets of text data and imagery, resulting in the launch of ChatGPT. And again, the difference there was that really people could actually interact with AI for the first time. As I said before, what's been happening in AI has been going for a long time, but really what's driven the recent progress is a number of things. It's a massive increase of investment. So it's actually hard to get credible and reliable data, and depends on how you want to think about it, whether you include spend on the capital equipment within AI investment or not. But by most measures, it's more than tenfold increase over the last decade or so, and it's upticked across the globe. And certainly, in recent times, I've read from various sources that the likes of Alphabet or Google, Meta, Amazon, Microsoft are all spending in excess of 50 billion each annually at this point. So enormous uptick, and the significance of that is much like we'd never had a COVID vaccine until the need was so great that the investment followed. It's amazing what happens when you throw enough resource at things. Similarly, if you look back to the US space program, and assuming you believe that they put a man on the moon, that it was a massive allocation of US resource that sent people there with, when you look at the footage, very little computing power, gauges and the like. But when you throw enough effort and resource at things, it's amazing what happens. Then there's been an increase in both digital data, and the rate of growth in digital data has been staggering. And then the ability to process that alongside, ongoing improvements in, if you like, the way to think about algorithms that are able to process that data and create more useful models. Sorry, I'll apologize for the size of the charts, but to give a sense from a scale perspective, in 2012, the training data set measured in tokens was about 1 million tokens. That's gone to 1 trillion tokens or more, out in 2024. So these are just they're logarithmic scales. These are massive increases in the size and scale. What was being observed into the late, into the 2021s, 22s, 23s, was that there was a declining benefit in the scaling of models, and they were getting to a point where literally all the digital data that people were able to access in the world had been fed into these LLMs. And that's really where, and one of the very significant things I'll talk about is the introduction of chain of thought models in mid to late 2024 was a very significant occurrence. And these were models that I'll speak about it a little bit more on the next slide, but started to be able to deal with complex reasoning, which has been the big challenge. The final element, I guess, that's really driven all of this is the ongoing improvements in computing and the reducing cost per unit of compute. And there's a gentleman, Ray Kurzweil, who's again someone that Stanford's been quoting his predictions on AI and tracking them, and he's claims to have had an 80% plus accuracy on the timeframes of most of the big predictions being within a year of when he said they would occur. He talks about the point at which we reach human level of intelligence in AI, as he always predicted it in this decade, really based on the point at which the computational power to replicate a human brain became affordable at that point, based on following the long-term trajectories that have been established around the ongoing increase in computing power per standard dollar. So huge increase in investment, more data, ongoing improvements in the models and hardware have all come together. And over the last few decades, what we've seen is generally for, if you like, more repeatable tasks, reading, image recognition, language, handwriting, speech recognition, essentially the models are performing at or above typical human performance. But complex reasoning has been lagging, and complex reasoning is where things get really interesting in terms of what AI means for society. As I mentioned, chain of thought models launched in mid to late 2024. And to help understand chain of thought really, if you look at LLMs historically in a very simplistic sense, overly simplistic sense, they were taking massive arrays of language data, creating massive vector databases that looked at the relationship between letters and groups of letters or words, and taking a statistical view of, based on an input, what the likely output would be. Chain of thought is quite different in that it essentially would take a problem or task or from a query or an input. It would break it into steps. It would then generate large numbers of possible outcomes for each step, test those, look for the most likely, the best answer, would then move to the next step based on that, and do that again. It would then continue to check for consistency in terms of where it was trying to get to. It could go back if it was going down the wrong burrow. And probably to some degree, I think more closely replicates perhaps how the human brain is working in solving problems or complex problem solving. ArcAGI was a benchmark, and this is what got people very excited, was that for a long time, the ChatGPT models and the like had continued to have relatively low scores, and there wasn't really much progress on ArcAGI. ArcAGI as a test was meant to give problems to AI models that were not in typical data sets, typical training data sets, so novel problems, if you like. They could be patterns and the like. And there was very little progress despite the growing increase in the size and cost of these models. And this is where we're sort of hitting that limit in scaling. And mid to late in 2024, that was when things changed with the release of the O1 and then the O3 models, which went from 32 to 87% in the ArcAGI results, and 75% was considered the point at which we'd hit AGI, or effectively a human level of intelligence, including across all domains, including complex reasoning. I think it's fair to say that most people would say we're not at AGI now, but it was a significant moment. And the other key thing that was seen out of that testing was that as you increase the amount of compute that you allocated, or the number of time and the number of iterations that the models were allowed to use to reach the conclusions of the answers, you saw improving results. And to me, that sort of had a striking similarity to the way that the human brain's been described, and System 1 and System 2 thinking, as was described by Daniel Kahneman, I think it was, in Thinking Fast and Slow, where traditional models, which are very much statistical, I've seen this before, here's your answer, could do those simple jobs, whereas more complex thinking required effortful thought or ongoing iteration and pondering, which is System 2. Despite that, there's still a range of challenges with AI. So it's fair to say we're not at that point of call it human intelligence. I think in terms of complex reasoning, it's still even the best models still seem to be somewhat narrow. They struggle with new or complex or nuanced reasoning. I heard recently one of these models that scored extremely highly in math testing, like at a very high level, PhD level maths, still struggling with seemingly obvious problems that had a human nuance. For example, Bob's had an argument with Matt. They've been longtime friends though. Matt clutches heart, he's having a heart attack. Does Bob help? Well, no, they're having an argument. And this is where, again, these models are still working on training, and sometimes struggle to have that more nuanced understanding of what's really going on. that goes to the question of what is understanding and how is our understanding work, and is this replicating it? And anyway, factuality and truthfulness, you can still get hallucinations, and that's been a big focus. Really, where AI gets interesting is the ability to give it complex tasks that you would otherwise have a human do that are maybe not well defined. For that, you need it to be able to deal with nuance and be broad, but you also need it to be reliable, notwithstanding that humans also make mistakes. I guess there's probably less tolerance to enact a system where there's still some probability for error. Integration has been something that has been slower than I think I would have expected as well. And we'll talk a little bit about agentic AI, but it's that ability to get AI from a screen to actually being integrated with the applications and software. Again, there's been concerns around privacy and how the data is being handled when it's going into these models. The ability to really see behind how a model might reach its conclusion, because these models are somewhat opaque, and often even the experts, the people who design these, will say, look, to some degree, we don't fully know what's going on once we set up the algorithm at a detail level within the model. Chain of thought has helped that, but still it's hard to see right many layers below the thought process, if you like. Again, there's been lots of reports around biases and the like within the models. They can also be tuned depending on the leanings of the companies that are creating them. Security, again, and the risk of security, when you've got a model doing responsible things. One of the other ones that we didn't put on here is deceit. And, as you're seeing, these models get increasingly sophisticated at times. They're also becoming deceitful if they feel it's in line with their sort of original objectives. Which is a fascinating idea. So where to from here? In the short term, the stated focus on a lot of these models is really around, rather than ongoing scaling, how can these models potentially, less data in the training sets, be able to deal with more generalized or less specific problems, more nuanced or novel problems. Agentic AI, which is again the concept of how you embed these models into the tools that we use day to day, and efficiency, really, how do we make these models more efficient to train and keep up to date. Over the medium to longer term, though, and there's a lot of debate around the timeframes. The focus of most artificial intelligence model developers is really around the idea of AGI, or artificial general intelligence, and ASI, artificial superintelligence. There's a lot of discussion about what AGI constitutes, but essentially they're models that can really do anything typically human can do across all domains. What was fascinating was that there was a long period where a reasonable number of credible people said that we'd never get there, but over the last few years, with the way that things have been progressing, there are a number of credible experts now thinking we may have AGI in anywhere between the next 1 to 5 years. I've always held the view personally that once you hit AGI, ASI being AI intelligence that's substantially beyond humans, may follow very quickly thereafter, because it doesn't have the biological constraints that a human does, and it will have the ability to self-improve at potentially very high rates. That is a extremely significant event for humanity, and in my view, probably the most significant event that will ever have happened in human history. In terms of implications for society, AI, I think, and we'll talk a bit about how to think about this for businesses, but there's a potential for, I think it's really going to be an accelerant for all technology, and that's across health, materials, energy, robotics, quantum computing, and the like. Anything where you can provide huge amounts of data and huge amounts of thinking that would be very hard to coordinate if you were trying to do that across multiple humans. From a technology point of view, that's going to make that high rate of change and disruption is going to make investment challenging. It also has the potential to accelerate, destructive technologies, biological weapons, cyber fraud, and the like, and to make that the development of those weapons more accessible to more parties. There is always the potential for loss of control of AI as it achieves intelligence that's as great or greater than ours. And I'm very curious. I read a bit about it, but how we're going to control something that's able to reprogram itself that is also smarter than people who've created it. From an economy and workforce perspective, it should increase efficiency and productivity. In this sense, I think it's similar to the Industrial Revolution. It's rather than the automation of labor, it's the automation of thought, and allow us to see through the huge complexity of our systems. It should also create new job opportunities and like alongside that. In my opinion, and again, I've read lots of opinions on both sides of this argument, but in my opinion, it is going to create downward pressure on wages. Despite the fact you've created more surplus, you've essentially reduced, if you like, you've increased the supply of human-like labor, which will, in my opinion, definitely drive down wages in the first instance, or create downward pressure and or job losses in certain spaces, particularly in the short to medium term, white collar, and you're already seeing that in banking sectors and the like, and coding. And again, I think, because you've got accelerated development and change, economic change, and potentially also military technologies, you may see a fair bit of disruption at a geopolitical level. Socially, there's potential for improved work-life balance because you're getting the same amount with less hours, and there's going to have to be a need, talk about it, but in a change in the social contract, in my opinion, because this will also increase wealth disparity, and there'll have to be ways to redistribute wealth that are not going to mess people up. I think this has some really huge potential benefits around the challenges we're facing in the aging population and health span. And there's very interesting stuff already going on in that space, which I believe this will accelerate. It'll enable things like personalised education, learning, delivery of cost-effective, personalised healthcare. I think the downsides are things like the wealth disparity, potential for systemic bias and discrimination being fed into these systems from the training sets. Again, we're already seeing it, and I think it may grow further, but misinformation, echo chambers, deep fakes, and losses in people's critical thinking, social skills and purpose if you're not using your brain, and these things are doing everything for you. The brain, like any other muscle, declines. And environmentally, it could help the transition and development of new energy technologies that assist with climate change. There is the potential that with more surplus, there's the ability to reinvest in our environment and biodiversity, which are becoming the next real big issue after climate change. But there are downsides also in the short to medium term around the energy and water demands from AI. What does it mean for...
Sorry, Ben, I'm just going to, we're getting close to time. I'm going to extend you out a bit because these are the slides about what it means for WA.
Yeah, so I'll go fast from here. Apologies. So in terms of WA, and this is, again, my views, I think it's an extremely difficult thing to predict how this whole thing's going to play through, and the further out in time you go, the harder that is. But WA as an economy is still heavily driven by demand for basic raw materials, which will likely have less exposure to AI disruption in the short to medium term. And the impact on our workforce accordingly is going to be slower because blue collar jobs and call it humanoid robots will, I think, be slower than white collar, the impact of AI on white collar jobs. We are well placed for data centers, though there's a lot of investment occurring elsewhere, and it's unclear how much data processing you have to have here versus what you can do elsewhere, where it's not, really critical in terms of latency. I think short term, there's hope in my mind that it'll help restart the challenges that we've had around productivity, might help with some of these energy system optimizations, healthcare pressures and the like. In the medium term, if you saw global growth boosted by AI, then that might actually, drive, increases in consumption and investment, which drive demand for our resources. Downside to me is it's hard to say, but over time, again, it just opens up greater uncertainty and possibility for change. It could be new ways to open up or process materials at impurities that were otherwise not accessible in other places. It could change demand for our oil and gas. We are in a good place to weather the instability. I think when you look across the sectors, and the percentages are just the percentage of gross value add for the state, again, we're still really dominated by oil and gas. I think, again, in the short to medium term, there's potential for efficiencies, use in the discovering or extending resources. Medium term risks I've talked about. Professional and financial services, we're already seeing the impacts. And there was a quote from one of the senior investment bankers talking about how AI could draft prospectus in minutes that would take a team, weeks. Property and construction, hopefully it might assist with some of the construction productivity challenges. In terms of the asset classes, I can talk about it later, but I think the impacts will vary a lot by sector. Transport, I think there's efficiency opportunities, at least in the short to medium term, and same thing in ag. And I think manufacturing, if one of our challenges were high costs of labour, is it may actually enable more cost-effective automation, allows us to more effectively compete internationally. I worry about retail when you can ask your AI to go and shop for the best price. I think it will just create, again, potentially further move online, but the real issue being increasing price transparency and margin pressure. I think when thinking about AI, and we can talk about this a little more maybe in question time, but I'd be encouraging business to think both in terms of what it means for your strategy, which markets are going to be positively affected, negatively affected. How does this affect the service and the ability to add value for a customer? How can you make investments given that the increasing rate of change means that you may not see payback or investment if there's a fundamental shift? And then how can you think about using AI in your operations to drive productivity and efficiency, support data-driven insights and decision-making? That for me is, we deal with more capital decisions, and in very complex projects, how can you see through the noise to what matters? How can you enhance your customers' experiences? Help enable your workforce? How can you drive innovation? How can you use it to improve, governance? And in terms of implementation of AI, then within businesses, again, I'm happy to talk about this more in question time, but I think it starts with really trying to have a view on how AI could be used in your business, looking at your business processes and where the biggest opportunities are going to be, and developing a bit of a roadmap and thinking about how that ties to your technology stack. I think having clean data and ordered data will make it much easier for AI to draw insights and then be useful. So thinking about how you can standardize your processes and clean the data to enable it to train itself, or to be trained on data that's meaningful. Upskilling your people and managing the change and the fear that comes with all of this. And then there's the safety side around governance, staging the way you roll it out, and also understanding that, as I said before, currently AI and data centers are huge consumers of water and power and have an environmental footprint, and understand what that means for sustainability strategies. So wrapping up, and apologies for going over time, I think the key message I'd want people to take away are that the AI capability and its integration into tools and its usefulness is going to advance extremely rapidly from here, based on the mass investment and commitment that's going on in this space. It's going to accelerate all technology, which in turn will mean that there is going to be higher rates of change and disruption, and that is also going to flow through to the workforce and the social stability. I think the technology is probably going to move faster than actually I think it's going to be limited by the ability for people and systems to adopt the technology and the need for the human in the loop. Much like we had a vaccine quickly, but the real constraint was the logistics of getting it out there. I think if and when we achieve AGI-ASI, it opens up changes the rules on almost everything that we think we know and all the historic things have taught us. And it gets very hard to predict what happens after that. I think in the short to medium term, WA looks well placed. But I think all businesses need to be looking at what it means for their strategy and how they use it in their business. So if you're happy, I'll leave it there.
Thank you.
We can go to questions.
Ben, thank you so much. It would be lovely if everybody turned their screens on, because I think particularly when somebody's presenting, it's really great seeing faces. Hello, great to see you all. Thank you, and thank you, Ben. That was the level of detail that you've provided for us. I have some questions, and I'm going to start off with a few while encouraging people to put some questions into our Q&A. At this point, what are you most optimistic about and most concerned about the long-term future of AI?
I think I'm fundamentally an optimist. I probably wouldn't do what I do if not. I think where I get to is that AI will create greater surplus. How we redistribute that in useful ways, ways that don't damage people and people can maintain sense of purpose. But fundamentally increasing productivity and efficiency should be good for society. It's lifted standard of livings, and it's just going to be accelerated. I think it has the potential to, the big basic human needs are things around the access to housing, safe, healthy environment, your health itself, access to education. I think it has the potential to make enormous changes in some of those things. And, I didn't get into some of the longevity side of things, but that space is moving really fast right now. And I think you listen to people like Ray Kurzweil speak, and he's convinced that we will literally turn off aging in the 2030s, which you can spend a lot of time speaking about that as its own thing. But most of we spend 50% of 50%, I think it is, of our lifetime healthcare costs in the last year of life, and most of the stuff we're treating is age-related disease. So again, the ability to solve that, keep people fit and well and productive, rather than this ongoing, overhang with an ever smaller percentage of people that are able to support that. I think it has huge potentials to deal with some of those, addressing those basic fundamental needs. The worries for me are the disruption on the way through. It's going to be very volatile, and I think the devaluation of labour and the job losses and the like that are likely to ensue in some spaces, and there'll be a period where society's catching up about how do we deal with that redistribution of the increased surplus. That's the stuff that probably worries me the most.
Thank you, Ben. Stephen Riley has a question saying, thanks, Ben, very interesting. How do you see AI shaping education, both school and tertiary level?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I sat on a school board on this, and I personally a big fan of the idea of personalized learning. What was really interesting was there was a study done recently, I think it was at Harvard Physics, where they looked at the results of students taught by this very well-credentialed, high-performing teacher plus AI, which was always the model, I guess a lot of people, including myself, expected, or AI alone, and AI alone actually delivered the best results. And this is where I think a lot of these things that we think are traditionally safe are because we haven't seen what it's about to become. But I think codification of information, how you think about probably the human skills, I think people who resist it are going to be run over, because it is an irresistible force. It's whether you like it or not, it's coming, and the economics and the cost imperatives of it will drive it in, and you cannot regulate it out, unfortunately, in my opinion. So I think, again, in these situations, it's best to figure out how you adapt to it and how you try to give people the skills that are going to best survive, at least in the short to medium term, and the adaptability to deal with the change that's coming and the ability to use these tools to best effect.
Thank you. Chrissy from the Fremantle Chamber of Commerce, why don't you ask your question?
Oh, thanks, Paula, and thanks, Ben. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Brilliant. I just spent the morning talking about the legal case with the firm Workplace, and that was a class action case where it is actually taking on the company for using AI to hire, as it was discriminating people who were over 40. As someone who loves AI, and I'm often talking to Paula about all these new platforms that both of us are trying, I've implemented probably about 4 or 5 into our business. And now this Workday action case has just stopped me in my tracks, being very concerned around the implications of my legal ramifications for not only me as the CEO, but certainly our board and the boards I sit on. That's my question, being what are your thoughts around that? Because it's kind of stopped me in my tracks a bit.
We're finding our way through, and this is where I rushed through the back end a little bit. We've been looking at how we're going to use AI in our business and trialing things. Those types of issues, how you deal with privacy, how you make sure that you're in compliance with all those obligations, is a critical factor. My view is there are always checks and balances. Unfortunately, someone gets caught and deals with the brunt of an unexpected, perhaps, outcome from using these tools. I guess it's that thing of trying to trial with caution and being aware of the potential for those drawbacks I touched on, and establishing ways to show that you're seeking to mitigate that as these tools evolve. Because honestly, the tools you're looking at now will look, for the reasons I talked about, that massive ongoing increase in available compute per dollar, and the sophistication of these systems, and then the ongoing integrations. What we're seeing now is will look very archaic in no time. I think my view is you continue to use and experiment with these things. I'm treating this as a learning opportunity because I know that what I'm looking at now is nothing like what it's going to be very shortly.
Thank you. Jacqueline Boakes, you asked a really interesting question about the ethics. Why don't you unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you so much. Hi, Ben. Can you hear me?
Hi, I can. Thank you.
Thanks so much, for a terrific presentation. I'm really interested, as someone who's often having these conversations in academia and with industry people, and of course with our students, about the ethics, the human-centered values when it comes to AI. Where do you see that? I'm wondering where that sits in your explorations, and what do you see as the implications for Perth-based industries there? Which is an enormous question. I know it's so unfair to ask
it is.
that, but,
no, you touched on my concerns at the very outset. Ultimately, you get to a certain age, and you start thinking about, well, why are we here and what are we doing, and looking for meaning and purpose. And for me, it's very much, how do I hopefully leave the place better than I found it and help my community? That gives me a sense of purpose. And there is a concern, there are concerns, the types of concerns I've talked about around the impacts on society and the like. I think for me, though, the people who go, I don't want it to change, are going to, it's adapt or die, and it always has been that way. And so to me, I think trying to resist what's coming will not end well for anybody that chooses to pursue that pathway. As I said, I've always looked at these things as systems are incredibly complex. I'm looking for things that I can fundamentally rely on as much as possible, recognizing that we always know less than we think we do, for a bunch of reasons I won't go into now, but around the way our brains work. And how do I, as I said before, how do I maximize my exposure to the positive and minimize my exposure to the negative? And I really think that's the way I would be approaching this. This is, in my opinion, is economically absolutely inevitable. And if you don't do it, someone else will do it. Other economies will do it. It's always been a competition at some levels, across communities and people. The question is, how do you try to maximize the size of the pie and then share it as equitably as you can without messing up incentives. But yeah, it's a very big subject. But I guess I'm saying I'd probably be inclined to lean into it and figure out how you can create more surplus and then reallocate surplus in the ways that look after, the people who are negatively impacted.
Thank you. John Butler, you've asked a question which kind of follows on from this. I'm wondering if you'd like to put it to Ben.
Hi, Ben. Can you hear me?
Hi, I can.
So, Ben, I'm in my 70s, have been involved in the law for 58 years, merged my small firm with a larger firm late last year, have significantly changed my responsibilities and the nature of my work, but I'm still working full-time. My plan is to step back to part-time in another couple of years and then ideally work part-time for the next 20 years. And I'm doing my best to embrace technology, but it comes with challenges at times.
Yep.
And some of my contemporaries and friends really don't embrace technology.
Yes.
And I see a huge risk of AI increasing the divide between those who have access to and embrace technology and those who don't. I mean, many of my contemporaries are terrified of being scammed, spammed, reluctant to answer phone calls, certainly not text messages, emails. So technology is a great aid, but also a dangerous field for those who can be taken advantage of. I see huge potential in AI and I want to embrace it. And that's why I'm listening to you. And it's been very, very helpful to have that history of AI that you've provided today. But I just have some concerns about, I'm actually going to semi-retire to a country town in New South Wales. And that's year 20 of a 20-year plan. And I'm in year 18 at the moment. And the availability of power obviously is going to be important. The availability of water. Some years ago, the country town to which I'm going to semi-retire had a situation where a mentally ill person escaped from the hospital, destroyed the Telstra connection to the town, and everybody lost their internet connection.
Yep.
Now,
and
obviously
your question is, John?
My question is, how do we, as a city, Perth, embrace AI and do our best to protect those who are currently vulnerable and likely to be more vulnerable because of AI?
I think, look, this is where, as I said before, there's maximize size of pie and then find ways to redistribute and assist people with the transition. If you think about it, in the early 1900s, there were really no safety nets for anybody. You've seen massive increases in the overall, if you like, standard of living. But a lot of it is coming from redistribution of wealth, because in a wage sense, there's been down real wage pressure throughout that. And I think this is just going to exacerbate. It's going to massively increase that, because it's also going to enable things like humanoid robots. And if you really want to see some stuff that would make your head spin, go down that burrow, because that's moving fast. It is, in my opinion, irresistible. I had a chat to one large law firm that does a lot of work for us. They were curious about it after reading the article in the paper, and we had about an hour-long chat. I said, look, guys, for me, in a business like that, you've got to realize that as AI becomes, at our level of intelligence or beyond, and can then ingest all the possible data, its ability to provide advice and all that kind of stuff is going to surpass any one individual's. And so the question is, when it's better at your job than you, how do you still add value? If you've got proprietary data, that's great. Like, that's valuable. If you own the health data that allows you to mine that and find a new cure for cancer using AI, you've got a defensible, moat. But the reality is, it's always been this way. You compete, and in change, there are winners and losers. And as I said before, I think the goal is to not stick your head in the sand when things are changing, but go, how do I adapt to this? Maximize my exposure to the good and minimize the bad. But in my opinion, again, you look at it, things like the ability for it to write copy for people, or all that kind of stuff. And it won't be specialist, in my opinion, it won't be necessarily even specialist tools, because these tools will be so good, you just point at the data and it will learn. And I think that's very near.
I've got two questions as we wrap up. I think, again, there's so many my brain is buzzing, but one of the things, this kind of what's in it for me, what jobs do you think are safe and what should our kids be studying?
I find this a really hard question, to be honest. I think the best indicator for me would be, look, even things like you go, oh, we'd never use a psych, but they're getting better results often in terms of people's assessment of the written interaction they're having with an AI model that they don't know if it's AI or it's a real person. They're getting better results out of that. A lot of our ability to provide historically care as opposed to band-aids is we can't afford the cost of these things, but you never really solve the underlying issues. This may enable all that sort of stuff to actually occur. And people go, I never talked to AI psych. Well, there's a lot of things we're doing now that we never thought we would do. And I think when the cost imperative is so great and the quality is so high, people are going to go, I don't care. It works and I can actually access it. And I guess the point I'm making there is that things that you think are safe may not be safe, even those high touch. I met someone who's literally been designing devices to help with care and keep people good when they're lonely, because again, the cost of that's hard to afford. I think, for me, short to medium term, the best indication would be if you spend most of your time looking at a screen, be concerned, right? In honesty, because there was a model, Claude. It wasn't very good and it wasn't well resolved, but it was essentially screen share, and you could just give it control of your computer and it would read everything and it'd ask you to do stuff for you. As these models get good enough, they will literally just look at it like you do and do all the stuff for you. They'll still want to come back and check in at certain checkpoints. Even if you've got a really good CFO, you don't just go, write every check for me, point blank. But it's hard to say where it's not going to get to. I think, as I said, things like nursing or blue collar jobs will be slower to automate than thought. Humanoid robots will be slower to follow. Things that, look for things that are really heavily driven by human to human nuance. But I think more than anything, it's how do you make them polymaths, people that can straddle across domains, bring together things, are adaptable. It's probably the best advice I can give. I find it a really hard question.
And a quick answer in terms of, you mentioned models there in your last question. Which models do you recommend to use for business?
I've been using mostly probably DeepSeek and ChatGPT, so Google's model and OpenAI's model. The thing I find most helpful is research, and it does the research as well or better than I or my analysts would do it, and it does it instantly, and it finds things that I can't find. So I use it a fair bit for that kind of stuff. I think those two models are still certainly at the upper end. Depending on what you're looking at, coding, I think apparently Claude's really good. But the rankings on what's good change all the time. I think all these models, there's going to be a lot of models that are very competent very quickly. It'll be which models can you then integrate into your workflows. That's where it's going to get interesting.
Ben, I think the fact that you agreed to talk to us today demonstrates this passion that you have to leave the world a better place than you found it, sharing the amount of information that you've sourced and worked to give us today. Thank you so much. The acceleration, that kind of the concept of the speed and the pace, you really
look at the spend. Look at the spend. Look at those underlying compute bits, and it'll tell you everything you need to know. It's coming, and it's coming very fast.
That's the quote of the day. Just to tell everybody, you will receive a copy of the webinar and the slides within the next 24 hours.
I'll provide some other resources perhaps as well, just some other things if people are curious and want to go down the burrow.
Okay, thank you so much again, Ben, for really sharing your thoughts on this incredibly complex and fast-paced topic. Thank you to everybody who's joined us. We still have 72 people online, which is a credit to your content and this topic today. As always, we have a number of events coming up. On the 20th of August, we have an incredible gentleman called Cormac Russell speaking about community development, and he's also going to do a workshop. We're doing a tour of the Western Trade Coast on the 5th of September with members, and drum roll, we have announced the Perth 2050 Summit is happening on the 22nd of October, and it's a full day summit, and we look forward to seeing as many members and non-members attend. And on the 10th of December, wrapping up the year, we've got our Premier's Address. We're 2:01. Thank you for those that have stayed. Thank you for dialing in. And again, thank you so much, Ben, and to the Committee for Perth team for getting us all online today too. Take care. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.